again, and welcome back, everybody. It's Laurie White with the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce with another edition of Chamber TV, episode number 164. And today, another in our continuing series of discussions with the candidates seeking public office in Rhode Island. And today we are talking to the Republican candidate for governor in Rhode Island, Ashley Kalus. Hey, Ashley, how you doing? Great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, easy question to start off. Let's sort of understand your backstory, Ashley, and how are you faring on the campaign trail, and what leads you to want this particular office?
Yeah, so things are great. Rhode Island needs a fighter now more than ever. Every COVID brought front and center the haves and have-nots, and every day it's getting harder for working families. We're getting killed at the pumps. Food prices are soaring. Electric costs are through the roof, and income is not keeping up with inflation. And as a mom of 3 school-aged boys, I understand the struggles. For me, I'm a problem solver. I saw front and center how during COVID, delivering COVID vaccines and tests, how government did not serve the people. And I'm all about holding people accountable and getting things done. I believe in benchmarks, key performance indicators, and standards. And that's what I'll do as governor. I will hold people accountable and deliver results.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about your decision to jump into the race. What were some of the key motivators, Ashley?
So really, it was the key motivators were sort of coming back and noticing that we're not competitive. It is not a great business environment, and the education system is not where it could be. I'm a mom, and I am a small business owner. I have started my own businesses. I've built them, and I know what Rhode Island can be, and I was disappointed at what it is, and I believe that we can make a difference, and we need to for the future of our children.
What are some of the key things that you have observed relative to the business environment in Rhode Island? Certainly, from the Chamber of Commerce perspective, we have been working with the General Assembly for a number of years to try to enact whether it's tax reform or issues around competitiveness, labor management issues, work rule issues. Matters pertaining to bringing in industry and various incentives. So under the Governor Kalus administration, give us a sense of how you would approach the Office of Economic Development, or Commerce, if you will, and what are the key problems and KPIs that you'd like to put forth?
So before us is a challenge of the next half century, and we need a leader with gigantic aspirations and with an economic agenda that is so bold that it taps into the hopes and dreams of all Rhode Islanders. So first, we need to provide a world-class education to all students, no matter their zip code. I will be the education governor. It's deeply personal to me, because if we have the brain power, companies will want to be here. The second thing is we need to have a better business environment. We need to be more competitive. We must stop bribing businesses to come here, but instead create the environment to which they can come here. The third thing is we need to leverage our assets. We have everything. We are the gateway to New England. We have interstates, railways, deep water ports, an international airport, and 400 miles of coastline. So if we do these things, businesses will want to come here, and the ones that we have will be able to remain. The fourth thing is that we need to be great at something. Massachusetts has biopharma, Connecticut has insurance, and New York has finance. If we have the political will, this could be a time of unparalleled success for Rhode Island.
What do you think about the prospects of the blue economy? There's been a lot of discussion about that lately, particularly in accessing some of the federal stimulus funds that are available for that kind of economic development growth.
I think that it's a great thing. I think the blue economy is something we wanted to talk about, and one of the things that we could be great at. I think that the way that we develop it makes a difference. So we need to focus on growth and competitiveness in order to drive those industries. But we are the ocean state, and we should leverage our assets. So the blue economy makes sense for our state, and it's something that it is something that we could be great at. But we need to approach it in the right way, which means that we need to have a better business environment, reduce regulation and taxes. We need to make sure that we have the fundamentals that will allow an industry to grow here.
The tax environment is always it's always been a challenge. We are a small state, small tax base. A lot of work has been done over the past decade or so to bring Rhode Island's personal income tax rates in alignment with neighboring states and trying to offer up a more competitive business environment. Where do you think Rhode Island's tax profile should land, particularly as it pertains to higher income individuals?
So we need to look at everything. Need to look at our competitiveness across personal income, corporate taxes, property taxes. Ultimately, we need to look at how we tax completely so that we are competitive regionally. We're not competitive regionally when we look at the entire picture. We are not, rated well for having a great tax environment, and that makes it challenging for us to attract industries and businesses. And so, if we want to be regionally competitive, if we want to lead the region, then we need to be competitive as a region as well. That we need to do.
I'm curious, as a business owner, what your thoughts are on the whole workforce issues today, the post-Great Resignation, and the flexibility that employees are, looking for relative to hybrid workforce. What are your thoughts on workforce development, and what would you advise employers to do to be able to retain the best talent, recruit and retain the best talent? And is there any sort of particular play for Rhode Island in terms of creating or fostering an environment that's particularly conducive to hybrid work?
So, one thing that I think about with the workforce is we need to strengthen the workforce. I was visiting a manufacturer in Pawtucket, and the owner said to me, "Ashley, we need to build things again." The Rhode Island Manufacturing Association did a survey of its members, and it found that on average, each company had approximately 33% of their workforce was over 55 years old. So there is an opportunity for younger Rhode Islanders eventually to take those well-paying jobs. Davies Vocational is a great model. I know that we already have $500,000 in the budget for engineering design. We should do more. So one thing that we can do is we can focus on developing vocational, technical, and training schools. So creating a regional county stream school campuses, which trains for jobs in the future. And it's not just coding. There are other ways that you can use your hands. So we should do that. We need to develop that portion of the workforce, and then also fundamentally fix the education system here as well.
You're running as a Republican, so I'm wondering, do you see any differences between yourself as a Republican and the candidates who are running as Democrats? Are there any fundamental differences that you would point to?
Well, I'm a Republican, so I think just generally the way that we solve problems might be a little bit different. I'm all about getting value for my dollar that comes from me being a small business owner. And I think that fundamentally is what is different. Is I have created businesses, I've built businesses, so I know what that's like. And so instead of focusing on, let's say, throwing money at problems, I look at, if we're going to spend money, are we spending it well, and are we getting a return? And I think that that is sort of the fundamental difference between the Democrats and the Republicans here, or at least me, is that I want to spend money and spend it well and ask, what are we getting as a return? I find that we have not gotten a great return on our investment when it comes to education. We spend a lot per capita, and ninth per capita, I believe it is, and then we are not ranked amongst the highest in the nation. So it's not how much money we're spending completely, but how we're spending the money. And are we getting what we should get back as taxpayers? And that's a fundamental question that you ask as a business owner, right? Is if I'm going to invest this money, am I going to get a return? And I think that is the difference between myself, is that I'm looking at it in terms of not just spending money, but what are we getting back?
Curious, Ashley, how you're enjoying the campaign trail and the kinds of places that you're visiting, and what are you hearing from constituents out there, particularly on the.
Yeah, so I enjoy the campaign trail because I get to meet businesses and individuals, and this is a great state. So every day just reinforces how much I love the people of Rhode Island. It is really nice to hear the stories that I'm hearing. I'm an outsider. I am not a politician, so it has been a little bit of an adjustment. But I think that Rhode Island needs an outsider, someone that's not beholden to anyone, and somebody that has real life experience building businesses.
So, are you technically an outsider, or where you were mentioning coming back to Rhode Island and you know jumping into the political fray and working on some of the issues? So, give us a sense of your backstory in terms of where you lived and your experiences and having come to Rhode Island fairly recently. What can we learn from your background and your experience across the country that would, you think, change the perspective or add a different perspective as governor?
Yeah. So what people don't know is we're back recently, but we were here before. My husband spent 8 years training in surgery at Brown, and then was in practice at Hasbro Rhode Island Hospital. We had to leave because there was an opportunity. We couldn't afford to be here, and we had $250,000 in student loans. I believe that in general, we should look at models that work around the country. That's the best way to guide us. It helps us make a decision about what will work for our state, but we also should look at other models of success. Myself personally, I've worked in business consulting originally in my career. I went to the London School of Economics and to Columbia University, where I studied economic policy and security policy. I then, with my husband, built a medical practice and several other businesses, but also vertically integrated and built operating rooms, which we ran. Then I got involved in the COVID response because we had a unique skill set. We were able to do things at medical procedures at high volumes, which at the beginning of the pandemic was the hospitals were going to be overwhelmed, and running high volume surgical facilities had a special skill set that allowed us to get involved in testing, then eventually in vaccine. So I've worked in corporate America. I've built a business. I have an educational background in policy, and I am willing to look at other models that work and bring them to Rhode Island, because that's what we deserve. Is we have the ability to do anything as a state. It's all about political will.
And how do you size up the political will that you've seen so far, whether it be within the halls of the General Assembly, the congressional delegation? What would be your fellow general officers in the executive branch? The department leaders, cabinet leaders. What are your main observations about that?
Political will from the people of Rhode Island. That's what I care about. And so I believe that the people of Rhode Island are ready for change. They're ready to demand that politicians deliver results. So I feel on the ground and in communities from business owners, especially small business owners, which are 98% of the businesses and employ 200,000 people. They were crushed by COVID, crushed by inflation. People are ready for change, and that readiness for change creates the political will necessary to make a difference, and then the elected officials will follow.
What else have you done on the campaign trail, and where are some of the places that you visited, and what have you gleaned from what you've heard?
I am all over the state. That is the great thing about the state, is that we're a small state, and I can, be at Newport in the morning, and then in Pawtucket, and then back around. I am visiting as many businesses as I can. I'm going to chamber events. If I'm invited to a meeting or a community meeting, I will try to go. I am very responsive, and I believe that it is important to meet with constituents. It's important to hear the concerns of business owners, and I try to do that. I wake up at 6 and I'm not done until 10 o'clock at night, and I will work every single day hearing the concerns of the people of Rhode Island. And I am hearing that businesses are getting crushed, that moms are concerned about their children's education. They're concerned about parental involvement in education. I mean, we could talk a little bit about education as well, because it's a huge thing. For me, they're concerned about parental involvement in education. They're concerned about closing gaps in the mental health of their children. I met with a special education advocacy group that simply wants a special education ombudsperson to help be a neutral person to help figure out differences and opinions of what should happen with their children. I don't know why we wouldn't help families and children that need it the most. So I'm hearing a lot about business, how it's not competitive, how people can't make it in business because of all the regulations, because of the sort of external environmental factors like inflation. And I'm hearing from parents that we need to do something about the education system. Now is the time.
You mentioned parental involvement in education. What is your take on that? What specifically are you referring to?
Yeah, so I think that COVID, for me too. I was. It was really hard during COVID for me as a working parent. I felt like I was failing my kids because I had to go to work at the very moment they needed me the most, right? During remote learning, and my kids really didn't do anything but play Roblox for probably a year, just because I had to go to work. So parents want to be involved. They were probably more involved, or at least I was. I tried to be more involved because all of a sudden the education system was brought into our living rooms, our kitchens during the day during COVID. And so that immediate involvement I believe, leads to a desire to be more engaged with the education system, and also ask serious questions about how we can do better as a state. And about education reform, we can definitely do that. I would like to talk about education. I will be the education governor. It's deeply personal to me. I actually was a failing student in high school, a terrible student, and a Department of Education official made a decision to allow me to attend college for high school as a failing student, which is usually not done. And that decision, that version of school choice, likely saved my future. So when we talk about education, we really do need to look at models that work. And I've talked about that economically when we deal with issues of affordable housing, when we deal with a lot of our challenges. Let's look at models that work and see if we can work in Rhode Island. So the model of education reform that worked is Massachusetts, and that's because it was a turnaround. So we need to, in order to do so, we need to have high standards and pay our teachers more. We need to level the playing field in terms of educational funding, and we need to close gaps, especially those gaps in learning that was caused by COVID. And we need to ensure that every child has a right to a quality education, and that needs to be a constitutional right. We also must know that, we have to be flexible because one size does not fit all. Education is a civil rights issue, but it's also an economic issue, because if we have a great education system, kids can stay here. They can start businesses. They, can employ Rhode Islanders, and then eventually they'll be able to retire here. We cannot underestimate education, and we shouldn't. We don't. Education as a driver of economic success. It is a fundamental thing that we must address and approach if we are going to grow and be competitive as a state.
Have you had a chance to speak with Angelica Infante Green, who's the Commissioner of Education, as you well know, and the way the governance of our educational institutions, K to 12, post-secondary, and our institutions of higher education, how they are managed from a state bureaucracy perspective? Any observations, thoughts, suggestions for change that you would come forward with?
Yeah, so I haven't spoken with her. What I've gone through, those are policies that broad policies that have positions underneath it. So in terms of what we need to do, first off, we need to stick with it. We really do need to be committed to education reform and understand that it's not a tomorrow thing. That means that you still can't trap children in failing schools. So we need long-term education reform, and then we need to not trap children in failing schools, which means that if your child is trapped in a failing school, you should be able to pick a public school of your choice. Now, in terms of, having high standards, it's not pushing kids ahead and doing social promotion. It's making sure that we support kids that need help. So having high standards is one thing. Paying teachers more. More work should mean more compensation. That makes sense to any business owner, anyone. That's only fair. And then when we talk about leveling the playing field, that's where we need to deal with funding issues. We have a almost $13 billion budget, and 27%, nearly 27% goes towards education. And unfortunately, in Woonsocket, in Pawtucket, and Central Falls, we still have some of the lowest per pupil spending. So we're leaving kids behind. That is not leveling the playing field. And then when we talk about closing gaps, we need to close gaps. There are gaps between different areas that we do need to close those gaps. But also when we think about COVID, we now have really big gaps in learning that we need to address immediately.
You mentioned closing gaps and the performance of students in Central Falls and Pawtucket and Woonsocket, other places. What are your thoughts on what's happening in Providence and the state's takeover of the school system in Providence? Do you think it's working?
Right. And so in terms of what's happening in Central Falls, Pawtucket, Woonsocket, it's actually about spending, that we have the lowest per pupil spending. So the state should level the playing field. That's only fair. You have to give everybody the same chance. In terms of Providence, framing it as a takeover, words matter. That is not the correct frame in my mind. Is that the state and Providence need to work together to fix the schools. So it needs to be a partnership. It should be treated that way. Educators in the schools, they are our partners, and we must work together. So if we frame it as a takeover, it's going to be addressed as a takeover. Really what it is a partnership to make sure that we have the best schools, that we fix our issues, that we also capitalize on our strengths. So whenever I hear about Providence schools being taken over, I understand the language, but it really sets us up for a relationship that is really not productive. We need to work together to fix the schools.
So are you suggesting that the district might best be returned to local control after, we've been in this particular situation for a couple of years with the state actually, addressing and managing the day-to-day activities of the district? Should it be returned to local control sooner rather than later?
The goal is to return it to local control. I don't believe we're there yet. But it needs to be a partnership over time to work together to fix the schools. Right now, it's framed as the state's just coming in, and we need communities. We need parental involvement. We need to work together. But right now, these states should come in and bring in more resources, which is what they're doing. But the framing is not two parties working together, but one taking over. And that's just really not the right approach. It sets us up for this sort of dynamic in this conversation about returning to local control. That will happen eventually, but right now there needs to be a partnership to actually make sure that the schools are serving families and are serving kids. And we understand that it's going to be a longer term, project. Like that is what is happening now. And we cannot trap children in failing schools. So this is where a public school choice makes a difference, because it's going to be a long-term thing. How long the state is involved, it depends. But I do not believe that immediately we should return to local control. But I do believe that there needs to be a conversation about partnership right now.
One of the issues that's affecting the schools in Providence is the inability to be able to attract teachers of color into the school system. And there's probably, 5 or 6 different reasons why the teacher pipeline, particularly in Providence, is not as robust as it might be. And one of the issues that's been identified is the cost of housing. So it kind of manifests itself in the teacher pipeline conversation, but it's really the issue of housing, affordable housing, workforce housing is a big issue from an economic development perspective. What are your thoughts on what Rhode Island needs to do to be a leader in workforce housing?
Yeah, so there's no housing inventory. Anybody can tell you that now. The cost of land, the price of materials, supply chain issues make it really difficult. There are families that want to buy houses are stuck in rentals, and because of that, there's just no rental inventory. So it's a really big issue. Also, we have Rent Relief Rhode Island. That's a federal program. It had over $300 million. It had only $100 million left, and they're starting to take and stop taking applications in June because there may not be funding. So we also have a crisis there as well. In terms of affordable housing, one solution that we can do is we need to incentivize, and this is a short to medium term solution. We need to have a pool of money to incentivize developers to build affordable housing. That's one way that we can do it to address the problem immediately. But ultimately, this is about competitiveness of us as a region. So if we're more competitive, if we have a better business environment, businesses will want to come here, and then it'll create development. We need to focus on our fundamentals. We need to fix our education system. We need to create a better business environment, and we need to spend the time and do the work necessary to do it. But yes, housing is a crisis.
Talking about various crises, the climate crisis. Your thoughts on that, and what could Rhode Island do? What should Rhode Island do to cut a more effective ESG profile?
So in general, how I feel what Rhode Island needs to do is that we need to ensure that we're preparing for things that we know are going to come. For me, a big concern is flooding and making sure that we're investing in resilience. That is the biggest thing that we need to do as a state, is to protect our infrastructure, protect property, because if we don't plan for flooding, we're going to have a massive impact on businesses going forward. So we need to focus on things that we can do to build resilience and deal with the issues that we have, coming up. We cannot ask unreasonable things of businesses and people without solutions that are practical. And I find that, we really should be focusing on these challenges that we know are coming before us and investing to make sure that we have a plan to prevent, issues like that in the future.
What are your thoughts on the role and the responsibility of business to help, lead by example and to affect change relative to the climate crisis? A lot of the literature says that employees are really, really interested and really value working for companies that walk the talk, if you will. And that's a real recruiting strategy, and it's a recruiting challenge for companies that are not accepting the responsibility for business as leaders in net zero emissions. But generally speaking, I know that's a bit of a complicated tangential question, but generally speaking, what do you think the responsibility of business today is in working on these metrics?
I think that if a company wants to do it, I think that leading by example is important in corporate leadership. If it helps recruit employees, like you're saying, that is great. Businesses will do that. I think that we as a state cannot make ourselves less competitive. I think if you want to leave it to private industries for saying, hey, companies want to do this, it recruits workers, employees really like it, that's great. That companies will do that, right? It's really the labor market is tight right now. So if that gets somebody to work for a company and they're excited about it and it's good for the company, it's consistent with their corporate vision, I don't think anybody would argue with that. But we cannot make Rhode Island less competitive. That doesn't serve anyone. And so we can't force that upon companies. Now, there is a certain corporate responsibility, but as a government, we need to focus on resiliency right now because that is a real issue for us. So let's focus on the issue right ahead. And then companies who want to do that, I mean, that's great for them. It is important to show leadership.
We only have a couple of minutes left, but I do want to ask you, since you are a subject matter expert on COVID, what are your thoughts on where we are as a nation, if you will, relative to transitioning from the pandemic to an endemic?
So listen, I got involved very early in the COVID response, and everybody was doing the best that they could do. But we could have moved an endemic response sooner. That probably would have been better for businesses in Rhode Island. And I think it also would have been better just overall for children. So we do need to move to an endemic response to COVID. COVID is not going to go away. I'm disappointed by that. I started out at the beginning thinking that if we vaccinated everybody, it would go away. Or if I could just test enough people, then we would be able to prevent the spread. So I had that optimism. I've been disappointed in some ways. And I think that's just the natural course of this, is that now we need to learn to live with COVID. So what I can say is that as governor, I will ensure that we find a way to return to normalcy in a responsible manner, which is what we're going to need to do.
Okay, so we only have a couple of minutes left, so I do want to ask you if folks are interested in reaching out to you to volunteer for your campaign, or they want to learn more about Governor Ashley Kalus's priorities and platforms, tell us where people should turn.
Yeah, so you can probably hear sometimes we're having the doorbell coming. We have a really busy, it's really exciting. We have a bunch of folks who are coming in and very excited to be part of this. We say join the movement, I mean it, is that it is a community together to make a difference. You can go to ashleykalus.com, you can volunteer and learn more about what we're doing.
Yes, I heard the doorbell ring. And
I know, I'm so sorry. I know, I'm so sorry. But the nice thing is it's always ringing. People are always coming in here. People are engaged. They're excited. And that's what we want. If people want change, I win. And I think Rhode Island wins as well. So I'm really excited about this campaign. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to make a difference. Rhode Island, this is a once in a lifetime chance to hit the reset button. And Rhode Islanders, we need an outsider to get it done. And that's what I'm going to do.
Fantastic. So I'll let you go take care of the volunteers and
All right.
do all of that. But Ashley, thank you for being with us on Chamber TV. We'll invite you back anytime you'd like to talk more about the issues, and look forward to seeing you at the Chamber event sometime very soon.
Thank you so much.